The infinite expanse of space surrounded Commander Ethan Cross, a seasoned pilot of the star cruiser Intrepid. His vessel glided effortlessly through the silent abyss, its sleek silver hull reflecting distant stars. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the control panel as he adjusted course toward the remote planet Talinar. The mission was simple: deliver a shipment of medical supplies to a small colony. But, as with any job in the outer fringes, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The silence was interrupted by a warning beep. Ethan's eyes narrowed as his radar picked up multiple fast-moving objects approaching his ship. His instincts kicked in. Space pirates. Out here, they were a constant threat, preying on unarmed transports and lone travelers. Before he could react, the comms crackled with a harsh, robotic voice. "Unidentified ship. Power down your engines or be destroyed. This is your only warning." Ethan chuckled dryly, his hand already gripping the throttle. "Not today," he muttered. Without hesitation, he gunned the engines, propelling Intrepid into evasive maneuvers. Plasma bolts streaked through the darkness as the pirate ships opened fire. Ethan weaved through the assault with expert precision, narrowly dodging the deadly plasma blasts. His mind raced. There were 3 pirate ships, nimble, well-armed, and clearly intent on bringing him down. His ship wasn't built for combat, but Ethan had one advantage: years of experience in outwitting enemies. As the pirates closed in, he dove toward a nearby asteroid field. The massive rocks floated ominously in the void, their jagged edges offering a dangerous but effective cover. Ethan's hands moved swiftly over the controls, guiding his ship through the treacherous terrain. The pirate ships followed, but one by one, they started to falter, unable to match his precise maneuvers. Just as Ethan thought he might escape, a stray plasma shot struck the Intrepid's engines. Warning lights flashed, and the ship lurched violently. He cursed under his breath, realizing that he had no choice but to make an emergency landing on the surface of Talinar. As the Intrepid skidded across the barren landscape, Ethan braced himself for impact. The ship ground to a halt, and for a moment, everything was still. But the peace was short-lived. Ethan knew the pirates would follow, and he needed to act fast. Ethan stumbled out of the wreckage, his body aching from the crash. The planet's surface was rocky and desolate, bathed in the eerie glow of 2 setting suns. Smoke billowed from the wreck of his ship as he surveyed the surroundings. His heart raced. He had survived the crash, but what came next was anyone's guess. As he checked his supplies, a shadow moved in the distance. Ethan tensed, drawing his blaster. But as the figures approached, he realized they weren't pirates. They were something entirely different. A group of tall, ethereal beings walked toward him. Their skin shimmered in shades of violet and silver, and their movements were graceful, almost otherworldly. Most striking of all were their wings, large, delicate structures that glowed faintly under the fading light. The leader of the group, a woman with deep sapphire skin and golden eyes, stepped forward. "You are not one of them," she said in a soft, melodic voice. Ethan lowered his blaster slightly, though he remained cautious. "No," he replied. "I'm just passing through. But those pirates won't be far behind." The woman nodded, her expression serious. "They hunt us. We have been fighting them for years. But we cannot hold them off much longer." Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't here to get involved in some alien conflict. His mission was to deliver supplies and get paid. But something about these beings tugged at his conscience. They weren't soldiers. They were refugees, fleeing from ruthless invaders. "We could use your help," the woman said, her eyes pleading. "Our people are not warriors. We cannot fight the pirates alone." Ethan hesitated, but before he could respond, the distant roar of engines echoed across the plains. The pirates had found them. Ethan and the alien woman, who introduced herself as Valora, moved quickly toward the nearby shelter of a rocky outcropping. Her people, an ancient race known as the Aelari, followed closely, their wings folded behind them. Though they moved with grace, Ethan could sense the fear in their steps. As the pirate ships descended, their weapons lighting up the twilight sky, Ethan knew they were outnumbered. There were at least a dozen ships, each bristling with firepower, and the Aelari had little more than primitive defenses. "We have to take out their command ship," Ethan said, his voice grim. "Cut off the head, and the rest will fall apart." Velora nodded, though her expression was uncertain. "We will do what we can, but we are not fighters." Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster. "Leave the fighting to me." The first wave of pirate fighters swooped down, their cannons unleashing a barrage of plasma fire. Ethan returned fire, his shots precise and lethal, but there were too many of them. The Aelari tried to hold their ground, using ancient energy weapons that flickered with soft light, but it was clear they were outmatched. As Ethan darted from cover to cover, taking out pirate after pirate, he caught sight of the command ship hovering just above the battlefield. It was larger than the others, its dark, angular shape a stark contrast to the glowing Aelari. If he could disable it, the pirates would lose their leader and retreat. With Velora at his side, Ethan sprinted toward the nearest downed pirate vessel. "We're going to need a ride," he said with a grin, climbing into the cockpit. The controls were foreign, but he quickly adapted, his hands moving with practiced skill. As the stolen ship lifted off the ground, Ethan steeled himself for what was to come. The battle for Talinar had just begun. The stolen pirate ship roared to life as Ethan gripped the controls, guiding the craft into the thick of battle. Velora, seated beside him, watched in awe as he navigated through the chaos with precision. Explosions rippled across the sky as pirate ships collided with Aelari defenses, and the planet's surface shook from the intense firefight. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the massive command ship hovering above, its dark silhouette dominating the battlefield. "We need to get inside that ship," he muttered, his knuckles white from the tight grip on the controls. Velora looked uncertain. "Their forces are stronger than anything we've ever faced," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "But we cannot give up now." Ethan glanced at her. "We won't, but we need a plan. Once we're on board, we'll head straight for the bridge and take out their leader. Without him, the rest of the fleet will fall apart." Velora nodded, determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. "We will follow your lead, human." The stolen ship approached the massive command vessel, slipping through its defensive perimeter as the pirates remained focused on the ground battle. Ethan weaved through the enemy fire, dodging plasma blasts and debris as he steered the ship toward the docking bay. They landed with a jarring thud inside the command ship, the hangar eerily quiet. Ethan and Velora disembarked quickly, the tension thick in the air. His blaster was drawn, and Velora clutched a small glowing blade, an ancient Aelari weapon passed down through generations. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, scanning the vast hangar. "They'll figure out we've boarded soon." Together, they sprinted through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, avoiding pirate patrols and security systems. The sleek, metallic walls hummed with energy, and the air was heavy with the sound of distant engines. Every step they took brought them closer to the command bridge, but also closer to danger. As they rounded a corner, a group of pirates emerged, their weapons raised. Ethan fired without hesitation, taking down two of them before they could react. Velora moved with lightning speed, her blade cutting through the remaining pirates with a fluid grace that surprised even Ethan. "You're not bad in a fight," he remarked, reloading his blaster. Velora gave him a brief, determined smile. "We fight when we must." They pressed on, reaching the entrance to the command bridge. The door loomed before them, massive and fortified. Ethan quickly examined the control panel, his fingers dancing over the unfamiliar controls. "This is going to take a minute," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. As he worked to bypass the security system, Velora kept watch, her eyes scanning the empty corridor. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and adrenaline fueling her every breath. This moment would decide the fate of her people. Finally, the door slid open with a hiss. Ethan and Valora stepped inside, the bridge sprawling before them in a vast arc of consoles and screens. At the center of it all stood the pirate leader, a tall, imposing figure clad in dark armor, his face hidden beneath a shadowy helmet. He turned slowly, his voice a low growl. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Ethan leveled his blaster at the pirate leader, his eyes cold. "Surrender now, and this ends without bloodshed." The pirate leader laughed, a deep, menacing sound. "You think you can stop me? My fleet will tear your planet apart." Valora stepped forward, her voice steady. "You underestimate the strength of those who fight for survival." The leader's helmet tilted slightly as he regarded her. "I don't care about your people, alien. They are nothing more than prey." Before Ethan could react, the pirate leader drew a massive, crackling energy sword and charged at them. Ethan fired, but the leader's armor deflected the shots with ease. Valora leaped forward, her blade meeting his in a shower of sparks. The battle was swift and brutal. The pirate leader's strength was overwhelming, but Valora's agility and Ethan's precision kept them in the fight. Every swing of the pirate's sword sent shockwaves through the room, while Ethan's blaster shots chipped away at the leader's defenses. At one point, the pirate leader knocked Valora to the ground, his sword raised for the final blow. Ethan reacted instinctively, throwing himself between them and firing a point-blank shot into the leader's chest. The energy blast penetrated the armor, sending the leader staggering backward. Valora, seizing the moment, lunged forward with her blade. She struck true, her weapon sinking deep into the pirate leader's chest. He gasped, his body convulsing as the energy sword fell from his hands. With one final breath, the leader collapsed to the floor, lifeless. The bridge was silent. Ethan helped Valora to her feet, both of them breathing heavily. "It's over," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Valora nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You have saved us, Commander Cross. The pirates will retreat without their leader." As they stood over the fallen leader, the ship's alarms blared to life, signaling the retreat of the pirate fleet. Ethan exhaled in relief, knowing the battle had been won, but the war for survival would continue. With the pirate leader defeated and the alarms still echoing through the ship, Ethan and Valora made their way back through the corridors. The pirate fleet had begun their retreat, no longer coordinated without their command ship's leader. Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders slowly ease, but the aftermath of the battle still weighed heavily on him. As they approached the hangar where they had landed, Ethan glanced at Valora, who walked beside him in silence. "Your people are safe for now," he said, his voice low. "But the pirates will eventually regroup. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." Valora nodded, her expression serious. "We have you to thank for this victory, Commander Cross. Without your help, we would have fallen today." She paused, then turned to face him fully, her golden eyes filled with gratitude. "We owe you more than we can ever repay." Ethan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't do it for a reward. I'm just glad I could help." They reached the hangar, where the stolen pirate ship still sat waiting. Ethan glanced at it, knowing it was his only way off the planet now that his own ship had been damaged in the crash. He began preparing the vessel for takeoff, but before he could board, Valora stepped forward. "There is something we wish to offer you," she said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Valora extended her hand, and in her palm lay a small, shimmering crystal. It pulsed with a faint, ethereal glow, the same color as the energy weapons her people had used. "This is a shard of Aelari's heartstone," she explained. "It is a sacred artifact to our people, a source of immense power. We gift it to you, as a symbol of our gratitude, and as a promise that the Aelari will always be your allies." Ethan stared at the crystal, momentarily taken aback by the magnitude of the gift. The heartstone was more than just a token of thanks. It held untapped potential, something far greater than anything he had encountered before. Carefully, he took the crystal from her hand, feeling its warmth in his palm. "Thank you," he said sincerely. I'll keep it safe." Velora smiled, though her eyes were somber. "And we will never forget what you've done for us." As Ethan boarded the stolen pirate ship, he glanced back at Velora and the Aelari, who had gathered in the hangar to watch his departure. The weight of responsibility tugged at him. He had done what he could for these people, but the galaxy was vast, and danger was always lurking in the shadows. The ship's engines hummed to life, and as he lifted off, he couldn't help but feel that this encounter with the Aelari was only the beginning of something much larger. The Heartstone glowed faintly beside him, a constant reminder of the new connection he had forged. He flew through the atmosphere of Talinar, leaving the desolate planet behind, but his thoughts lingered on the people he had saved, and the battles yet to come. As Ethan entered the familiar vastness of space, he set a course back toward the inner systems, where his mission to deliver the medical supplies awaited completion. The stars blurred as the ship entered warp speed, the silence of space once again his only companion. But his mind was far from quiet. The Heartstone sat on the control panel before him, casting a gentle glow that filled the cockpit. What exactly was its power? And why had the Aelari given him something so precious, something that seemed to carry centuries of their history and knowledge? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much greater adventure. The galaxy had countless mysteries, and with the pirates in retreat, it was only a matter of time before someone else, perhaps even more dangerous, came seeking the Aelari and their ancient secrets. The comms crackled, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. A familiar voice greeted him. "Commander Cross, this is Talinar Colony Control. We've been tracking your ship and picked up some unusual activity in your sector. What's your status?" Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Just another day on the fringes. The pirates won't be bothering you anymore, but you'll want to send a team to recover the medical supplies. My ship's still grounded on Talinar." There was a pause. Then the voice responded, slightly incredulous. "Understood, Commander. We'll dispatch a recovery team immediately. And good job. We'll see you soon." Ethan closed the comm channel and allowed himself a brief moment of relaxation. He had survived an ambush, uncovered an ancient alien race, and taken down a pirate leader all in one day. But as his ship hurtled through the void, the Heartstone glowing beside him, he knew this was just the start of a new journey. His next destination wasn't just the inner systems or the Talinar colony. It was wherever the galaxy needed him most. With the Aelari as his allies and the power of the Heartstone at his side, Ethan Cross would be ready for whatever came next. Ethan's ship soared through the blackness of space, but something gnawed at him, an unsettling feeling that he couldn't quite shake. He stared at the Heartstone glowing on the console. Its soft, rhythmic pulse felt almost alive, as if it were attuned to some hidden force in the universe. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared. His sensors had picked up an anomaly, something moving fast in his direction. Ethan leaned forward, his hands gripping the controls. He adjusted the ship's sensors, magnifying the source of the disturbance. There it was, a massive ship, unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't pirate-made. This vessel was larger, darker, and far more ominous. Its hull shimmered with strange energy patterns, and it cut through space like a shadow. Before Ethan could react, a transmission came through, the voice cold and mechanical. "Commander Cross, surrender your ship and the artifact, or face annihilation." Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't just about pirates anymore. Whoever was piloting that vessel knew about the Heartstone, and they were here for it. He tapped the comms. "Who are you? What do you want?" A brief pause followed before the voice responded, laced with dark intent. "We are the Syndicate. The Heartstone does not belong to you. Return it, or suffer the consequences." The Syndicate. Ethan had heard whispers about them, a shadowy organization that dealt in forbidden technology, black market artifacts, and merciless warfare. They were rumored to be behind some of the most dangerous operations in the galaxy, but no one had ever seen them up close. Ethan's fingers hovered over the ship's controls, his mind racing. He was outgunned, and his stolen pirate ship wouldn't last long against the firepower of the Syndicate. But giving up the Heartstone, that wasn't an option. "I don't think so," Ethan replied, his voice defiant. "You're not getting the Heartstone." The response came swiftly. "Then you will die." The Syndicate ship opened fire, beams of dark energy cutting through the void toward Ethan's vessel. He yanked the controls hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the first volley. The ship rocked under the pressure, and alarms blared again as his shield struggled to keep up. He needed to think fast. The Syndicate ship was too powerful to face head-on. His only option was to outrun them, but that meant finding a safe place to hide, or at least somewhere where he could regroup. Ethan scanned the star maps, searching for the nearest habitable system. There, just within range, a remote planet orbiting a dying star, surrounded by thick nebula and asteroid fields. It wasn't an ideal place for a retreat, but it was his best shot. Ethan engaged the hyperdrive, the stars streaking past as his ship jumped to light speed. He could feel the Heartstone pulsing beside him, its energy thrumming in tune with the engines. Whatever power it held, it was clear now that it wasn't just a symbol of the Illyri's gratitude. It was a beacon, drawing in forces far more dangerous than anything he had anticipated. As the Syndicate ship loomed behind him, its dark energy weapons charging for another strike, Ethan gritted his teeth. He wasn't just running from a fight. He was running toward answers. What was the true nature of the Heartstone? And why were these forces so desperate to claim it? Part 8. Into the Nebula. Ethan's ship rocketed toward the dense nebula that surrounded the distant planet. His hands flew across the controls as he adjusted course, pushing his ship to its limits. Behind him, the Syndicate vessel was gaining, its dark silhouette cutting through space like a predator stalking its prey. The nebula loomed ahead, a swirling cloud of gas and dust that would obscure sensors and disrupt communications. It was a gamble, but one that might give Ethan the edge he needed to escape. He guided the ship into the nebula, and immediately the cockpit lights dimmed as interference scrambled the systems. The Syndicate ship followed, its massive hull slipping into the fog, but Ethan could see that its sensors were struggling. This was his chance. He cut the engines, letting the ship drift silently through the gas cloud. He powered down all non-essential systems, hoping that the nebula's interference would cloak his ship long enough to lose the Syndicate. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The deep, unsettling quiet of space. The ship drifted through the thick mist, the only light coming from the pulsing Heartstone. Minutes passed, and Ethan held his breath. He checked his scanners, seeing nothing. Maybe it had worked. Maybe they'd. A sudden jolt rocked the ship. Ethan's console lit up with damage reports. The Syndicate had found him. The ship shuddered as another blast slammed into it. Ethan powered up the engines, throwing the ship into evasive maneuvers. He ducked and weaved through the nebula, dodging asteroids and debris as the Syndicate's relentless fire rained down on him. His options were running out. The nebula was only delaying the inevitable. He couldn't outrun them forever, not with his ship in its current state. He needed something more, a plan, an advantage, something to turn the tide in his favor. Then the Heartstone flared to life. The once soft glow intensified, filling the cockpit with brilliant light. Ethan shielded his eyes as the stone's energy surged through the ship. Systems began to react, rebooting with newfound vigor, and the controls pulsed beneath his hands. "All right, let's see what you can really do," Ethan muttered, gripping the controls. The ship accelerated, moving with speed and precision he hadn't thought possible. The Heartstone had somehow integrated with the ship's systems, amplifying its power. The Syndicate ship was still on his tail, but now Ethan had a fighting chance. He guided the ship through the densest parts of the nebula, his reflexes sharper, his movements more calculated. As the Syndicate vessel tried to close in, Ethan banked hard to the right, positioning himself behind a massive asteroid. Then, with one final burst of speed, he flew directly toward the Syndicate ship. At the last second, He veered away, and the Syndicate's own momentum carried them straight into the asteroid's path. A massive explosion rocked the nebula as the Syndicate ship collided with the asteroid, its hull torn apart by the impact. Ethan pulled away, his ship emerging from the gas cloud just as the Syndicate vessel disintegrated behind him. Breathing heavily, Ethan slumped back in his seat. He had survived. Barely, but the questions surrounding the Heartstone only grew larger. Whatever power the Aelari had given him, it was far more potent than he could have imagined. And if the Syndicate was willing to chase him across the galaxy for it, there were likely others who would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. Ethan glanced at the glowing Heartstone. "What are you?" he whispered, the question hanging in the air as his ship continued its journey through the stars. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just about survival. It was about unlocking the Heartstone's true potential and discovering the secret it held. And Ethan Cross wasn't about to back down. As Ethan's ship glided through the void, leaving the wreckage of the Syndicate ship behind, the silence in the cockpit was filled only by the steady hum of the Heartstone. He watched its glow, his mind racing with questions. The stone's energy had saved his life, but it also left him with more uncertainty than ever. He knew the Syndicate wasn't the last threat he'd face. They were part of something bigger, something ancient, powerful, and ruthless. He had to find answers, and the first step was to figure out how the Heartstone worked. Ethan adjusted his course, setting coordinates for a distant, uncharted system. He'd heard of a place, a hidden archive rumored to hold knowledge of forgotten artifacts. The Syndicate's obsession with the Heartstone wasn't random, and if anyone could provide answers, it would be the Archivists, an enigmatic group of scholars said to live on the planet Oritus. As the ship entered the jump to hyperspace, Ethan allowed himself a moment to rest. His body ached from the constant strain, and his thoughts were a blur of near-death experiences and mysterious artifacts. But as his eyes closed, a dream took hold, one that felt too vivid to be just his subconscious. In the dream, Ethan was standing on a battlefield, a vast, broken landscape littered with alien ruins and towering monoliths. The sky above churned with dark clouds, and strange, ethereal figures moved in the distance. At the center of it all was a massive structure, ancient and glowing with the same light as the Heartstone. Suddenly, Ethan wasn't alone. A figure appeared before him, a man, tall and cloaked in dark robes, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The figure raised a hand, and Ethan felt a surge of energy course through him, as though the Heartstone inside his ship was resonating with the being. "You hold the key," the figure said, its voice echoing in Ethan's mind. "But you do not understand its power." "Not yet." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. The figure continued, stepping closer, its gaze piercing through him. "The Heartstone is more than a weapon. It is a conduit, a bridge between worlds. But it comes with a cost you have not yet seen." The dream shifted, and Ethan found himself standing in a dark chamber. In the center was a pedestal, upon which lay the Heartstone, its light flickering like a dying star. Around it, shadowy figures gathered, their hands outstretched toward the stone. But as they touched it, they withered, their bodies crumbling to dust. The dream shattered, and Ethan woke with a start, the Heartstone's glow still pulsing softly beside him. He wiped the cold sweat from his brow and steadied his breathing. He didn't know what the dream meant, but one thing was clear. The Heartstone was dangerous, and he was in deeper than he had imagined. After hours of hyperspace travel, Ethan's ship dropped out of light speed, and the planet Oritus came into view. It was a desolate world, its surface scarred by ancient craters and surrounded by thick layers of dust clouds. As he descended through the atmosphere, his ship's sensors picked up faint energy readings, directing him toward a hidden valley where the archivists were said to reside. Ethan landed the ship on a barren plain, the wind kicking up clouds of dust as the engines powered down. He took a deep breath and pocketed the Heartstone, feeling its comforting warmth against his side. Stepping out onto the surface, He was greeted by a harsh landscape of jagged rocks and lifeless terrain. In the distance, he could see a structure, a low, domed building that appeared to be carved directly into the mountain. Approaching cautiously, Ethan reached the entrance, a large archway adorned with intricate ancient symbols. He placed his hand against the stone, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft rumble, the door slid open, revealing a dimly lit passageway. The inside of the archive was as vast as it was ancient. Rows upon rows of towering shelves lined the walls, filled with artifacts, scrolls, and relics from countless civilizations. At the far end of the hall, an elderly figure sat at a massive stone table, his eyes scanning through an ancient text. He looked up as Ethan approached, his expression calm and knowing. "You've come for answers," the archivist said in a voice that echoed through the hall. "About the Heartstone." Ethan nodded, surprised but not entirely. The archivist seemed to know more than he was letting on. "What is it?" Ethan asked, pulling the Heartstone from his pocket. "And why does everyone want it?" The old man stood, his movements slow but deliberate. He gestured for Ethan to follow as he led him deeper into the archive, toward a secluded chamber at the back. As they entered, the room seemed to hum with energy, and Ethan could feel the Heartstone vibrating slightly in his hand. "The Heartstone is not a single artifact," the archivist began, "but one of many. These stones were forged long ago by a forgotten race, designed to channel immense power. But their true nature is far more complex. They are connected to the very fabric of the universe, capable of bending reality, opening gateways, and tapping into energies that even the most advanced civilizations cannot fully comprehend." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "So, the Syndicate, they want to use it as a weapon." The archivist's eyes darkened. "Yes, but their understanding is flawed. The Heartstones are dangerous in the wrong hands. They can amplify power, but they also corrupt those who seek to control them." Ethan stared at the glowing stone in his hand. It had saved his life, but at what cost? He remembered the dream, the figures who had touched the Heartstone, and turned to dust. The archivist continued, his voice somber. "The Syndicate is only one faction in a much larger conflict. Others will come, Commander Cross, seeking the stone. They will stop at nothing to possess it." Ethan's grip tightened on the Heartstone. "Then what do I do?" The old man looked at him with a mixture of pity and resolve. "You must protect it, but you must also learn to wield its power before it consumes you." For the first time since receiving the Heartstone, Ethan felt the weight of its true burden. He had stumbled into something far greater than a simple mission. The fate of worlds might rest in his hands, and the power he now carried could either save or destroy them. But as he looked at the Heartstone, glowing faintly in the dim light of the archive, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to run from this fight. Not anymore. As Ethan prepared to leave the archive, the archivist handed him a small, ornate device. "Take this," he said. "It will help you when the time comes." Ethan took the device, unsure of its purpose, but he nodded in thanks. The road ahead was unclear, but the pieces were slowly falling into place. The Syndicate, the Heartstone, and the ancient conflict he had been pulled into, it was all part of something much bigger. As Ethan's ship lifted off from the surface of Oritus, the Heartstone pulsed softly beside him. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As Ethan's ship soared through the stars once again, the weight of his newfound knowledge pressed heavily on his mind. He had the Heartstone, an artifact that could shape the very fabric of reality, but it was a double-edged sword. If he failed to control it, it could consume him, or worse, fall into the hands of those who sought to wield it as a weapon. The Syndicate was far from defeated. The destruction of one ship wouldn't stop them, and they knew what he carried. Others would come, perhaps even more dangerous than the ones he'd faced so far. And now, Ethan had another group to worry about, those who would stop at nothing to see the Heartstones gathered and controlled for their own purposes. But Ethan was ready. He had to be. His destination was a distant planet known as Velanfor, a neutral world at the crossroads of several galactic factions. It was a place where information flowed freely, and where the Syndicate had influence, but not total control. If Ethan could find an ally, or at least lay low for a time, he could plan his next move. As the ship neared Velanfor, a faint beep echoed through the cockpit, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. It was a distress signal, weak but clear. His first instinct was to ignore it. He was on the run, after all. But something in the back of his mind wouldn't let him. What if this was part of the larger conflict? What if it was connected to the Heartstone? He hesitated, then altered his course. The signal was coming from the outer rim of a nearby system, near an asteroid belt. As Ethan neared the source, his sensors picked up a single ship, damage, drifting. Ethan scanned the vessel. It wasn't Syndicate. It was Alari. Velora. His heart raced as he brought his ship alongside hers and opened a comm channel. Velora, this is Ethan. Do you read me? A moment passed before her voice, strained but alive, crackled over the speakers. Ethan, I knew you'd come. Without wasting time, Ethan initiated docking procedures and boarded her vessel. Inside, Velora lay in the cockpit, her wings tattered, her face pale but determined. She had fought, and lost, a battle against something far stronger. They're after me, Velora said as Ethan knelt beside her. The Syndicate. I tried to hold them off, but they're too powerful. They want the Heartstones, all of them. Ethan's eyes widened. All of them. There's more than one. Velora nodded weakly. Yes, the Heartstone you carry is just one piece. There are 3 more scattered across the galaxy. If the Syndicate gathers them all, they'll have the power to bend reality itself to their will. Ethan's mind reeled. He had barely survived with one Heartstone. How could he possibly protect the others? Velora grabbed his arm, her golden eyes locking with his. You have to stop them, Ethan. Find the other Heartstones before they do. The Alari once guarded them, but we failed. Now it's up to you. I can't do this alone, Ethan said quietly. You won't have to, Velora replied, a faint smile crossing her lips. There are others who will help, but you must move quickly. Ethan nodded, standing up and helping Velora to her feet. They both knew the Syndicate wouldn't be far behind, and they didn't have much time. With Velora aboard his ship, Ethan set course for Velanfor once again. He needed allies, and fast. Days passed in a blur as Ethan and Velora searched for clues to the remaining Heartstones. On Velanfor, they met with informants, traders, and mercenaries, anyone who might have information about the lost relics. But with every lead came danger. The Syndicate was everywhere, their agents lurking in the shadows, watching their every move. Velora's condition improved slowly, though she remained weak from her previous battle. Despite her injuries, she was determined to help Ethan track down the Heartstones. Together, they uncovered a pattern, an ancient star map, hidden within the relics of long-forgotten civilizations. The map pointed to 3 specific locations across the galaxy, each one marking the potential resting place of a Heartstone. Their first destination was a planet called Verdun, a world covered in dense jungles and shrouded in mystery. Legends spoke of an ancient temple hidden deep within the wilderness, where one of the Heartstones was said to be entombed. But Verdun was also a place where no one dared to go. It was guarded by an ancient species of sentient beings, fierce protectors of the secrets buried within their land. Ethan and Velora landed on Verdun's surface, stepping out into the humid alien landscape. Massive trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like serpents toward the sky. The air was thick with the sounds of wildlife, and every shadow seemed to hide some unseen threat. We're getting close, Velora said, her voice quiet but focused. I can feel it. Ethan nodded, gripping his blaster tightly as they pressed deeper into the jungle. Hours passed, the terrain growing more treacherous with every step. But eventually, they came upon the temple, an enormous stone structure overgrown with vines and moss. Its entrance was guarded by towering statues, their faces worn by time but still imposing. "We're not the first ones here," Ethan muttered, pointing to the syndicate insignia etched into the stone near the entrance. "They're already inside." Velora drew her weapon. "Then we need to move fast." Inside the temple, the air was cooler, the walls covered in ancient glyphs. They followed the winding corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls. But as they neared the heart of the temple, they found what they had feared. Syndicate soldiers, already at work extracting the Heartstone from its resting place. A fierce battle erupted. Ethan and Velora fought side by side, using every ounce of their skill to take down the syndicate operatives. Plasma blasts lit up the dark corridors, and the sound of weapons fire echoed through the ancient halls. But the syndicate had prepared for this. As Ethan closed in on the Heartstone, a new enemy stepped forward, a figure clad in black armor, the leader of the syndicate's forces. His face was hidden behind a helmet, but his voice, cold and calculating, sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "You've come far, Commander Cross," the syndicate leader said, his voice distorted through the helmet. "But this is where your journey ends." The fight was brutal. Ethan's every move was countered, every strike met with lethal precision. The syndicate leader was unlike any enemy he'd faced before, strong, fast, and deadly. But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. Not now. As the two clashed, Velora rushed toward the Heartstone, using her last ounce of strength to shield it from the syndicate forces. With a surge of energy, the stone flared to life, bathing the room in a blinding light. The syndicate leader recoiled, momentarily disoriented. It was the opening Ethan needed. With a final, desperate strike, he knocked the leader back, sending him crashing into the temple walls. "We have to go," Velora shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm. They ran, the temple collapsing around them as the power of the Heartstone destabilized the ancient structure. Outside, they'd barely made it back to the ship before the entire temple crumbled into the jungle, burying the syndicate forces beneath the rubble. But as they sped away, Ethan knew this wasn't over. They had one Heartstone, but two more remained, and the syndicate would stop at nothing to claim them. The journey to the next Heartstone led them across the galaxy, through hostile systems, pirate ambushes, and syndicate traps. Along the way, they gathered allies, rebels, outcasts, and those who had suffered under the syndicate's iron fist. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, but Ethan knew that even with their growing army, the odds were stacked against them. In the final days, they arrived at the third and final location, deep in the heart of syndicate-controlled space. A massive fortress world, surrounded by fleets of warships, loomed before them. The Heartstone was inside, and so was the syndicate's entire command structure. The battle that followed was nothing short of a galactic war. Ships clashed in the skies above, and armies fought in the streets below. Ethan and Velora, alongside their ragtag band of allies, infiltrated the fortress, fighting their way toward the Heartstone chamber. There, in the heart of the fortress, they faced the syndicate leader once again. This time, it wasn't just for survival, it was for the fate of the galaxy. As Ethan fought the leader, Velora reached for the final Heartstone, knowing that uniting the three stones was the only way to stop the syndicate once and for all. But the leader was relentless, his power amplified by the Heartstones he had already claimed. In the final moments, as the leader prepared to strike Ethan down, the Heartstones flared to life. Velora, using the last of her strength, activated their power. A massive burst of energy erupted from the chamber, engulfing the leader and shattering the syndicate's forces. The battle was over. The Heartstones, now united, had chosen their wielder. But as Ethan held the stones, he knew the truth. The power they contained was too great for any one person to control. He couldn't allow them to fall into anyone's hands, not even his own. With a heavy heart, Ethan made the decision to destroy the Heartstones, sacrificing their immense power for the greater good. As the galaxy slowly began to rebuild, Ethan and Valora disappeared into the stars, their journey far from over. But for now, the Heartstones were no more, and the galaxy was safe. Years passed, and the legend of Commander Ethan Cross and the Heartstones became a distant memory, whispered among those who remembered the old wars. The Syndicate, fractured and leaderless, never regained its former strength. Peace, fragile but real, had returned to the galaxy. But in the far reaches of space, deep in the forgotten corners of the universe, something stirred. The echoes of the Heartstones, their power still resonating, whispered across the stars. And somewhere, Ethan Cross watched, waiting. For the next battle was always just beyond the horizon.